One thing I forgot to ask on the front end is, how many of you are married? Okay. How many of you wish you weren't married? Just trying to generate a little business there. You didn't. Not many of you fell for that one this time. Going to talk about a couple of things. We'll talk about love and marriage, and then if we have time, we'll talk about some differences between men and women. This is one concept that I find comes back repeatedly, over and over and over again. This concept of what's love and what's marriage? How do they relate? So to sort of give you, I'm going to give you a pretest. If you look in your book, there's 10 questions on love. And if you'll take just a few minutes to score that, that's the first 5. Here's the last 5. And if you'll take a few minutes to score that, then we'll do after a post-test and see if you learned anything. Looks like most of you have gone through that. It's pretty easy to score. They're all false. Now, usually at this point, people want to, what about question 7? What about question 5? We're not going to go through and discuss all of them, but once we go through this, hopefully you will can go back and see what we're talking about. This concept of love is so vague, it's so nebulous, and it's a basic misunderstanding of what love is. And, you know, particularly in the English language, we can say that we love potato chips, or we love cookies. We talk about we love to hunt, or we love to shop, or we love God. And even love is a euphemism for sexual relations. So no wonder we get confused about what love is if it can mean anything from potato chips to sex. So it gets really nebulous as to what love is. So I want to talk with you about that from a biblical basis and then talk about some application. Really, love, if you... I know Ed Wheat had like 5 different types of love. I sort of narrowed it down to 3. And there's agape love. What is that? That's the love of commitment. It's we make a commitment to someone. We do what's best for them, no matter the cost to us. And I like to look at that as sort of the spiritual aspect. And then there's the phileo. This is the sort of the warm, fuzzy feeling. Phileo, Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. Phileo is that aspect of love. And then the third is the eros, which is a love of passion. It's the physical aspect of love. Now, I lived in Louisiana for about 25 years, and I teased with Joe off and on that Joe was born in Louisiana and moved to Arkansas. And I was born in Arkansas and got moved to Louisiana. And I'm not sure why he got blessed and I got cursed. But it took me a while to get back to Arkansas. But there's a little town in south of Monroe called Eros, Louisiana. And every time I see that sign, I think, do they really know what that means? And then I think, yeah, it's Louisiana. They know what that means. But there is a Romance, Arkansas. So there is a difference there. So look at those three aspects of love: agape, phileo, and eros. Marriage is the only relationship that requires all three of those. For example, with children, agape, a love of commitment. You do what's best for them. You're committed to them no matter the cost to you. This is what keeps you from killing your kids, the committed part. Then there's the phileo. That's the warm, fuzzy feeling. And sometimes you have that for your kids and sometimes you don't. But it's the emotional aspect of it. But then when you get over to eros, then that is strictly out of bounds, off limits. What about a relationship with a friend? You might have agape, in other words, you're committed to that friend. Or the phileo. Normally, you'll have, if you like to be around them, you'll have the phileo. But again, agape or eros is off of it. It's not appropriate. So when you look at this, marriage, God intended us to have a commitment, a friendship, and the love of passion. All three, the only relationship. Now, not only does it require all three, but it requires the proper balance between those three. Agape. If you have agape, commitment in your marriage, you're going to have a stable marriage. It might not be a happy marriage, but it's a commitment. You're committed to it. It's one of those marriages where you say, I'm committed unto you until I die, then you pray for a quick death. In other words, I just don't think I can take this forever. But the phileo, example, the agape, the commitment, but then you see marriages where it's based on attraction, physical attraction. And so that's not going to be a stable marriage. So you want to have all three elements in a marriage: agape, phileo, and eros. Now, not only do you have all three balanced, but the basis is critical. These are like building blocks, and they build one upon the other. So let's sometimes to describe what something is, it's better to look at what it's not. And so what I want to do is start out and look at these three building blocks, if you will, in marriage, and take it from a secular view. What do you normally see in the culture? And I've just sort of dubbed this the Hollywood basis. The Hollywood basis looks something like this. It used to started with friendship, moved on to eros, and then agape. My mother loved musicals. And so the theme of a musical sort of went like this. Boy, girl, next door. They become friends, and then they are attracted physically, and then maybe they get married. And, I never quite understood musicals. She'd take me to Oklahoma, West Side Story, things like that. And I'd get into the movie, and about the time it got really intense, then all these people start singing and dancing. I never could get the hang of that. That just wasn't my thing. But anyway, that was what you saw. That was sort of the storyline. Well, today it's sort of changed. What you see in a typical movie today is it starts with eros, in other words, physical attraction, passion, moves to maybe friendship, and then finally to commitment. Now, this is what I talked about earlier, the term starter marriage. This is what you see more and more of today. People do not want to make a commitment. They're attracted physically, So they will move in with each other to sort of see how this is going to work out, then make a commitment. We were talking to a couple over the weekend, and their daughter was their flower girl. In other words, they lived together for about 5 years before they decided to get married, and then their daughter was the flower girl. I thought, how's that going to work out for her? You know. But here's the point. The point is that if we're not willing to make a commitment, and the statistics show this, the statistics show that the divorce rate is higher with couples that live together before they get married. Why? Because they're not willing to make a commitment. So this is sort of what you see. And then this idea of love is that a person has no control. Is there such a thing as infatuation? Absolutely. You can be infatuated with someone, but that is not necessarily love. I can remember back as a kid, about 12 years old, came home every afternoon after we got a TV, and I know some of you think that's strange after you get a TV, but we got a TV, and they had this 30-minute show on there, Mickey Mouse Club. And I was infatuated with Annette Funicello. I thought, man, I've got to find some way to move from Stevens, Arkansas to the West Coast. But guess what? I got over it. It was an infatuation. But this is what we're taught. People have no control. It's something that you fall in love. It's flung upon you unexpectedly. You have no choice. The term fall in love, that's like falling in a tar pit or getting something all over you. You know, it's not active, it's passive. In other words, it just happens to you. It does. But what does that lead to? Love just is either you got it or you ain't. People come in all the time, well, we were in love, but now we're not. Get over it. You don't understand what you're talking about. You're talking about infatuation. You're talking about just the feeling aspect of it. If love is something that just happens, then let me ask you the question. What happens when what just happens quits happening? It's called divorce. And I see this all the time. People say, I don't love them anymore. And they're talking about the feeling aspect of love. We live in a society where the emphasis is based upon the physical. Go down to Walmart and look at the magazines. Everybody looks like that, right? With a little airbrushing and photoshopping. But we live in a society that puts a premium on appearance. You know, someone wants to pursue someone, well, they want them to have a good personality and look good. You know, about 20 years later, I want to ask what Dr. Phil asked. How'd that work out for you? Particularly if that person had no character. But we don't look like that. Appearance is preeminent. Studies have shown that children in child care, the more attractive kids, you know, the ones that didn't look like us, are treated better. They receive more attention because of appearance. A person's worthiness even is attached to their appearance. Now, if I really bought into that, what I would do is marry the ugliest person I could find. Then why? Because no one would steal them from me, and if they did, who would care, right? That's what it leads you to if you just want to base it on appearance. Love, actually, in most cases now, is just a euphemism for sexual relations. Love someone, make love. Love is feeling and desire motivated. This is no more than animal instinct. if we're talking about what love is. When you go back and look, if that relationship is based on eros or based, that's what you have. Love is a getting rather than a giving. Let me make this statement and see what you think. I love her so much I cannot live without her. What do you think about that? Is that a good statement? Let me show you what that leads to. Here's a guy that was estranged from his wife. He loved her so much he couldn't live without her. And if he couldn't live with her, then no one was going to. So he killed her and killed himself. Is that love? No. Love is not just a getting. When we look at the other flip side of this, we'll find out that love is a giving. Love is conditional. In other words, if you meet all of my needs, I'll love you 100%. 80%, I love you some. 60%, I'm out of here, Jack. That's, you're not meeting my needs, so I don't love you anymore. It's conditioned. How would you like a marriage like that? Now let's go back and look at the biblical basis. The biblical basis is it's built on a commitment. Moves to friendship and then finally moves to eros. It is the foundation. A person does have control. I ask people, they don't love each other anymore after they've been married and they want to come talk about it. Well, what is it made? Did someone hold a gun to your head and make you get married to this person? There obviously was something about that person you liked, admired. But it starts out with a commitment. Love is a matter of the will. This is the agape aspect of it. You do choose. It's a choice. Love feelings now ebb and flow depending upon your actions. We're going to talk about that in a minute. The fact that the phileo and even the eros increase and decrease over a period of time, and that is what gets people confused. And so we'll talk about that in just a minute. The emphasis is on the spiritual. Let me tell you, folks, spiritual trumps physical every time. And what do you look like, or what do you look for in a person? Character. This just blows me away. What I will find, and it typically in younger people, it's the girls who talk about this guy that I'm infatuated with. I know he's rough and he's got some problems, but after we're married, he'll change. You're right. He will. What I want you to know on the front end is not only that's all you're going to get, that's the best you're going to get. I tell young girls, if you're in a relationship with a guy and he is verbally abusive, you can just pretty well count on it, it's going to turn physically abusive. You want character. Character is something that doesn't change. Appearance changes. All the other things change. But character is what you want to look for. Love is a commitment. Love is from God. Let us love one another, for love is of God. In other words, I want God to love my wife through me. I want God to love me through my wife. God is the originator of love. I cannot love my wife without God allowing me to love God, to love her. It's that relationship. And love is giving of oneself to another. In 1 John 3:18. My little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth. In other words, it's I can live without you if that's the best for you. It's loving the other person to the point that you're willing to do what's best for them. And then love is unconditional. Let me just read. This is a true story. It's the best I've ever seen of understanding what love is. It was a busy morning, approximately 8:30 a.m., when an elderly gentleman in his 80s presented to have sutures or stitches removed from his thumb. He stated that he was in a hurry and he had an appointment at 9 a.m. I looked at his vital signs and had him take a seat, knowing it would be over an hour before someone was able to see him. Now, the story goes on, and he gets fidgety. He looks at his watch. He's got to go someplace. And she said, "Okay, well, I'll go ahead and move you in the front of the line. We'll take the stitches out." And so she gets to talking with this elderly gentleman. He said, "Yeah, I go down to the nursing home and have breakfast with my wife every morning at 9 a.m. And it was 8:45. And he said, "Yeah, she has Alzheimer's, and she hasn't known me for about a year." And so the nurse says, "What difference does it make? If you go down to have breakfast with her, she doesn't even know you." And he patted her hand and said, "She doesn't know me, but I know her." That's commitment. That's commitment. Now I know on the day you say "I do," that's not what you feel like you're signing up for. But committed love means you're there. Amen. I know that. I've experienced that. I've watched the monitor flatline. And then I've seen God take me from that point to giving me someone else to love. Amen. And do you know why I think He gave me such an awesome woman to love now? It's because I was committed in the first marriage. Commitment is what holds a marriage together. And when you have commitment, then you move to the phileo. And then you move to the eros. You know, there was a book written, Sex Begins in the Kitchen. And you think, that's a strange book. But I'm telling you that awesome sex in a marriage starts with a commitment. It starts with the phileo and then moves on to the eros. It doesn't go the other way around. You've got to have that commitment. So, in a marriage love relationship, does marriage sustain love, or does love sustain marriage? Well, the answer is yes, depending upon which love you're talking about. For example, back over in Genesis chapter 24, verse 66 through 67, Isaac got a mail order bride, Rebekah. And in that verse, in Genesis 24, it says, "And the servant told Isaac all things that he had done. And Isaac brought her, Rebekah, into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death." Do you notice the sequence there? It says he married her, and then he loved her. Now, in a good part of the world today, there still are prearranged marriages. And I will admit that when my children got that age, I toyed with the idea. But that didn't work. But the point is this: the commitment comes before the other aspects of it. Here's a statement. This is an old saying I made up. It's not your love feelings, the phileo and the eros, that sustain your marriage, but your commitment. Your love commitment to your marriage, which is a covenant relationship, is the framework that allows for the existence of love feelings. In other words, you make the commitment, then you move on to the other. And this is what I see 95%, 95.2% of the time. We don't love each other anymore on postmarital counseling. And my only response is, well, I'm sorry. You'll just have to learn to love each other again. Now, that sounds like, bummer. I thought you were going to tell me something. You're telling me I've got to endure. I've made a commitment and I've got to live through this the rest of my life? Yep. But I want to deliver the good news to you. You can make that commitment. And those feelings you can control. The ups and the downs. Now, how does that work? There's a little verse. Matthew chapter 6, verse 21. It says, "For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." What does that mean? That means wherever you invest your time and effort, that's what you're going to love. You know, people tell me, this is important to me, that's important to me, that's important. And I'll file it up here. Make no call whatsoever. If I want to know what's important to that person, I want to see two things. I want to see their checkbook, their ledger, where do they spend their money. I want to see their day planner. I want to see where they spend their time. That is what they love. Where your treasure is, there's where your heart's going to be. It's not about intentions. It's about where do you put your resources. That has all types of applications. But it has an application in marriage. And what does that look like? Will, actions, and feelings are definitely related. And I've gone over this a lot of times with a lot of different people. How does that work? Well, there's the will, there's actions, and there's feelings. Now, how are all of those related? It can be negative. We'll start out with negative. The cycle can be negative actions are driven by feelings. Folks, we live in a society where actions are driven by feelings. And you see all sorts of things going wrong. Wheels coming off the wagon because actions are driven by feelings. Let me give you just a common everyday illustration. You know, God breaks us up into morning people and night people. Suppose you're a night people. When the alarm goes off in the morning, do you feel like getting up? Well, if you're a morning person, you're laying there just waiting for the alarm to go off so you can get up. If you're a night person, you're trying to figure out what's going on. You don't feel like getting up. Well, suppose because you don't feel like getting up, you hit the snooze alarm. Have you ever noticed how snooze alarms teach us to count by 9? You hit it again. And after a while, you realize you're going to be late for work. So you think, I don't feel too good. I think I'm sick. So I'll be sick. I'll call in, you know. And so you didn't feel like getting up, so you didn't get up. Didn't go to work. Now you might get by with that one day, but if you get 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, what's going to happen? You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your paycheck. You're going to lose your stuff. And how are you going to feel about that? probably not too good about that. Now, let's just sort of reverse that. And if you look at, this is what I call the negative cycle. Your feelings determine your actions, and what does it do to your will? Destroys your will. The less you do, the less you want to do. Now, let's sort of flip that, the positive cycle. What if your actions are driven by your will rather than your feelings? In other words, the alarm goes off, you don't feel like getting up, but by sheer act of the will, you take those feet, put them on the edge of the bed, and you get up. And you stumble into the shower, get that cup of coffee, and then what is going to happen to your feelings? It may be 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but by that time you feel good. In other words, the will determines your actions, which determines your feelings. That's the positive cycle. This is a principle of life. This is a principle of people, I don't feel close to the Lord. Well, why do you not feel? Chances are you're letting your actions be driven by your feelings, and that's destroyed your will and your relationship. So what do you normally tell people? Well, you need to get back in the Word. You need to associate with fellow believers. You need to man up on your prayer life. And then by those acts of the will, how were you saved? Because you felt like it? No, because an act of the will, you realized who you were before Almighty God. You accepted what He's done for you. And then the feelings followed. Now, what's that got to do with marriage? Everything. Everything. You start out by resolving, you made a commitment to love that person. And then you take loving actions. People tell me, well, I'd feel like a hypocrite if I did this for my spouse when I didn't feel like it. Really? Do you feel like a hypocrite when you take the paycheck because you didn't want to go to work? No. And this is, I see parents all the time. Well, my kids don't want to go to church. Or my kids don't want, cop out. I won't get off into parenting. That's another 6 hours. But follow through with loving actions to your spouse, and you know what's going to happen? The feelings of phileo and eros are going to follow. Here's the point, people. If you invest, if you make a commitment, and whether you feel like it or not, if you will invest in the proper actions, that's why I tell my wife every day, I love you. I care for you. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. You know why? Because when I do that, I'm investing in her. And when I invest in her, my feelings increase. And this is what happens to people who have fallen out of love. Remember all the way back to the first, that matrix with the dot star down in the lower left-hand corner of being physically available, being physically, not just in the presence of, with your head in your phone or your head somewhere else. You need to have that relationship. You need to invest in that person. When you invest in that person, your feelings follow. You're going to have a long, lonely, slow, dying marriage if you don't invest in each other on a regular basis. You let the will determine the actions and let the feelings follow. The negative aspect. Let me give you a banking illustration. When I moved to Springdale, Arkansas, bought a house. Problem was I didn't have enough of my own money to just buy that house outright. So I went down to a company and I made a deal with them that if you will give me the money to buy this house, then I will give you large sums of money every month for a long period of time. It's called a mortgage. Love that house. Well, after living in that house for a while, there's things you notice that, well, I would have changed this, changed that, and just not as enamored with that house. So what if I picked up pen and paper or sent an email to the mortgage company, explained to them, when we moved into this house, I really loved it. But since then, I don't feel that much about it. It just doesn't move me. Therefore, I won't be sending you any money, any month, anymore. What do you think that response, that email is going to be? It's going to be something like this. Mr. Fincher, I really can't. We'd probably be even stronger. I don't care how you feel, Mr. Fincher, but we've got a signed piece of paper here which says you will do this. And sometimes with married people, I have to get to that point with them. I don't care how you feel. You made a commitment before God with everyone else. Now, put your big boy pants on, or put your big girl pants on, and start taking loving actions toward that spouse, and the feelings will come up. Now, is it going to happen overnight? Absolutely not. Now, let me give you the worst case scenario of this. This works in the negative. And I get sort of frowned on as being very narrow-minded. Be cautious of whom you spend one-on-one time with of the opposite sex. Because what happens? This same principle works in the negative. I've seen it with ministers, I've seen it with pastors, I've seen it with missionaries, I've seen it in the corporate world. I spent 30 years in the corporate world, and I've seen it there too. What happens is you start investing your time in. First, where it starts is you don't invest time and effort where you need to be at home because you're busy. And so what happens when you stop investing time and effort in your spouse? The feelings start to decrease. And then on the job or in ministry or in the coffee shop or whatever, there's someone that you start spending time with, investing time with, talking with them, sharing about different aspects of your life and the things that you should have been sharing at home, you're not. What happens to that feeling? It starts going up. And you get out of balance. All of a sudden, here's someone else you love, and you don't love your spouse anymore. What are we talking about? Feelings. So what's the solution? Well, let me tell you what's going to happen. If the solution is I love this person anymore, I don't love that person, then I'm going to leave this person, marry that person, it's going to start all over again. That's why second marriages, the divorce rate is even higher. And third, even higher. What's the solution? Cold turkey. Stop investing in that person. Start investing in the one you made the commitment to, and you get the balance back like this. Now, is that going to happen overnight? No, because this didn't happen overnight. It's going to take a while, and you're going to have to get there. But I'm telling you, this is crucial in your relationship, and particularly, who do you think the devil's going to attack? The leaders. And you know, as I've talked through this, faces have come to mind as to that is what has happened. And I'm just telling you, that's the principle that's going on. So what are feelings? Feelings are nothing more than interest on invested actions. So the application in marriage is this. The key, the cornerstone to marriage is a spiritual, a physical, and a mental commitment. That is what holds a marriage together. And those of you that aren't married, and if God has for you at some time to become married, let me tell you, number one, what you look for is look for a person who has character. Look for someone who has a relationship with God, not only just a relationship with God, but a growing relationship with God. You start there, and then you build on the other. The other will come. The other you can determine by investing in that person. Okay, buckle up. I'm going to go through this because we've got, as I can tell, 8 minutes. We live in a society that tries to make men and women the same. In God's sight, we're equal. Go back and look in Galatians. It says, in Christ there's neither male nor female. Women are never second-class citizens. But we are different physiologically. You can just look at some differences. I'll look at these right quick. All of these differences. Basic cell structure. Folks, if you can get down to the basic cell structure and tell whether it's male or female, that's different. That's different. And all the way down to blood structure, brute strength, skeletal structure, basal metabolism. I can give you all kinds of statistics on that. But physiologically we're different. But where it really gets interesting to me is when you get over into different mentally and emotionally. Let me just go through a couple of differences. Do you know men and women communicate differently?
Yes.
Okay. Women communicate in what's called spider webs. They'll talk about this a little bit, and talk about that a little bit, and talk about this a little bit, and that a little bit, and that a little bit, and then they'll tie it all together. I mean, guys, you've experienced this. You've come home, and your wife says something like, "Oh, we're going to talk about the kids." And so you sit down and you put on your most empathetic face. And she says, "Well, Mother called today." And then about 5 minutes into the conversation, you're wondering, I thought we were talking about the kids. Just be patient. She's building the spider web. She's going to give you all the details and then pull it together. Now, there are solutions to that. I mean, you can tell her, look, give me the bottom line, and then we'll go back to the details. Why? Because men talk, it's like a rope with a series of knots. In other words, we'll talk about this, tie a knot, move on to the next subject. Next subject. And we communicate so differently. And this is important because you need to understand that. Because, guys, we meet somebody during the day. And you have a 10-minute conversation. You come home and say, "I met, so-and-so from 5 years back." "You did? Well, how's their wife?" "I don't know." What are their kids doing?" "I don't know." Why? Because we communicate differently. Guys, pull out your phone, make some notes during the day, because she wants all the details. I do that. I make notes. Something happened during the day because she wants the details. Because you come home and she says, "How was your day?" Could have been a mass murder on the job. Because when you leave, you want to turn it off and don't want to talk about it anymore. Because, see, there's another way we look at it. You see that brain, if you can look at it, it's down the middle, it's divided. And there's a difference between the connection in that between men and women. In men, about 26 weeks or so, there's a cord between the left and the right half of the brain called the corpus callosum. And in a male, the mother secretes a hormone, an antigen, that actually decreases that cord. Now, ladies, you understand what I'm saying. Your husband is basically brain damaged. There's a reason for that. Because men tend to operate either in the left or the right half of the brain. The right half is the creative part. The left half is more of the logical, sequential. That's why, ladies, your husband can seem so insensitive. Because he's over here in the logical, rational part. That's why when you were pregnant and you were hugging the commode, he was standing there brushing his teeth. It's like, I can't do anything about that. So, I've got to go to work. So, that's the way it's going to be. Well, men, we come across very insensitive. And we can't take clues. Joe just gave you an illustration of that. When Jesse was slamming cabinet doors. We tend to be in the left or the right half, not at the same time. Women, on the other hand, are much more holistic. They are in the left and the right half at the same time. And you get strange things out of that, like woman's intuition. They can tell you things that you need to listen to, guys. You can meet someone for the first time, both of you, and you're having a good conversation. You walk away and she says, I don't trust him. You say, what do you mean you don't trust him? You don't, we hadn't even met him. I don't know, I just don't trust him. You better listen to her. Because she's processing both sides of the brain. She's listening to what's being said. She's listening to what's not being said. She's listening and watching body language. And so she's much more holistic. Now, that's the good side. Holistic can have a bad side. Because what affects her in one area of her life affects her in the other areas of her life. I mean, just like Joe came in and he turned it off. He'd mess with people all day, and you in ministry will have the same tendency. I've had all I can take for one day, so I'm going to come home and I'm just going to have peace and quiet, and your wife wants to talk. If you've got kids, she's been with crumb grinders all day. She wants someone that she can look eye to eye and talk to, have an adult conversation. And so if you don't listen, then she's holistic. In other words, you don't care about me. You don't listen to me. You don't want to know. So there are significant differences. And sometime I'd like to talk with you a little more about that. I'll flip through this. But in games, women fellowship, men compete. That's why, ladies, your husband will take your 4-year-old son and beat him bloody at any game because he wants to win. You want the fellowship. Development of self-esteem, men from being respected, women from being cherished and valued. In terms of love, men pretty much practical and tangible. These are not all the same, but it's probably at least a 90% true between men and women. But sometimes it's different. That doesn't mean it's wrong, it's just different. Women in terms of symbols, pay your spouse in emotional currency. We'll talk about that sometime, this emotional currency, because how you relate is extremely important. And it goes all the way back to how people relate. Mood changes, what the driving needs are. men, physiological fulfillment, and sexuality. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Okay, I'm 2 minutes over, so we'll stop.
Well, Joe, we came to a mission training seminar and we got a marriage seminar. Wasn't counting on that, but it's very, very vital. And listen, the next session will be focusing on evangelism. Brother Gerardo Carrion. We also have a breakout session in the second room on the left for the ladies. And different ones will be leading out in that during the week. So let's take our 10-minute break, okay?